those of you who do not already know me, my name is Anders Carlstedt. I'm from Sweden. I've spent the larger part of my, if you call it career or whatever, within the field of information security and risk management. I've been working for companies earlier as, for example, PwC, Accenture and Deloitte, managing their practices in Sweden and the Nordics. I even worked for Coopers and Lybrand before that, for those of you who can remember that company. So I have a background which consists, you could say, of auditing, supporting the financial audit, auditing information security aspects, also technology implementation projects, implementing ISMSs, etc., etc. I've also been involved in international standardization since the late 90s, and I've been representing Sweden as a technical expert to SC27, the committee which governs the 27000 series for a long time, even at a time where it was not even called the 27000 series even. So I've been stuck in this field for a long time. I'm not going to throw hundreds of slides at you presenting various standards on privacy or information security or cybersecurity. That's not the intent with this presentation. What I would like to do is to talk to you about where we're at currently within standardization, why we're there, how standards can help you, my view on what standards can and cannot do for you and your organizations, and strengths and weaknesses with regards to standards, and also a little bit of the same as for the standardization process as such, because of course the process of standardization impacts the quality of the final product, the published standards, so to speak. And I know most of you, at least some of you, I hope, have some opinions on the quality of the standards you are receiving as end users from ISO and your national standardization bodies. So that is essentially a summary of what I'm trying to present here for the next 30 minutes or so. So, standards as such. There are some differences when we talk about, how shall I say, topics such as privacy, cybersecurity, and information security. And I will try to, again, give my take upon those differences and why all of a sudden, also from a standardization perspective, there is an interest in addressing these new topics and areas. So if you look at, for example, privacy. Why is privacy so important, and why has it become important for standardization? Well, not all of a sudden, but over time, we have entered into a situation where not complying with with requirements with regards to privacy actually has an impact on organizations. Of course, not complying with or having a poor level of information security has always also had an impact on an organization. But how evident has that impact been to the general public and the stakeholders? Sometimes not so much. To be honest, a few years ago or historically, how many organizations have gone public with their poor level of information security or incidents happening based upon their poor level of security? Not that many, or am I wrong? It's not something organizations typically brag about, right? The difference we have here is that with privacy, for example, we have a situation where a certain stakeholder, the legislator, and another stakeholder, the public, and other stakeholders such as shareholders, etc., all of a sudden have more of a vested interest in the status of the organizations they have a relationship with or to, be that a government entity, a company, or whatever. And it's also even to the point where people write or produce funny cartoons about privacy aspects. I mean, we have seen a few about information security in the past, but you typically don't see that about ISO standards, for example. And I think that that is one of the factors which has heavily impacted the position of ISO and also the relationship between ISO and various government bodies when it comes to standardization. And we'll talk more about that. You also more or less have the same situation when we look at cybersecurity. Cybersecurity, not all of a sudden, but developing over the last few years, is suddenly something which is of public interest. It's a hot topic. I mean, compared to information security or IT security, cybersecurity has sort of a more sexy ring to it, right? And you have more or less also the same situation. Cybersecurity is a government or national concern, whereas information security in the past was also of interest to government entities and such. But all of a sudden we have a situation where we have, on a national level, an interest of making sure that you reach the correct level of, let's say, protection. And it's also something which is in the public eye. So there has been a shift, in my view, over the last, let's say, 10 to 15 years, where information security used to be something which was a field of practice and of interest to maybe not just a few people, but to a selected group of people, still reporting to management, still reporting to government entities, etc., has all of a sudden become something which is more or less to a greater extent in the public eye. I mean, yes, 15, 20 years ago, of course, hackers were sexy. There were even movies about people hacking different companies, cybercrime. Maybe they didn't call it cybercrime as such, but it was there. But now we have a situation where people at the highest level, representing various countries, speak about the level of cybersecurity, enforcing cybersecurity programs, selecting people to advise them on cybersecurity issues. So it's a new ball game, generally speaking, in my view. And you have the same thing. With poor levels of cybersecurity, you might also end up in a situation where poor levels of information or cybersecurity will come at a cost. So again, more or less the same as with privacy, you have a situation where it's clear that there is a commercial interest in maintaining an acceptable or reasonable or adequate level of, and I will call it still, information security. So this means that there has been, in my view, over the last few years, a shift. You could see the same a few years ago, but that was more or less based upon, how shall I say, a number of commercial entities driving the issue together within standardization when we got the drive for standards vis-a-vis cloud, for example. But in my view, privacy and cybersecurity is something different, because here you have countries, legislators, groups of countries such as the European Union, for example, coming together, deciding upon what is the acceptable level and what laws do we need to enforce in order to reach those levels. If you then look at the landscape, yes, there has been some progress over the last few years. There has been some standards developed both by ISO and by other entities. But in my book, and this is again the view of Anders Carlstedt, not of ISO, SE27 or the Swedish Mirror Committee, to be honest, If we compare the situation with cloud, we have been a little bit on the slower side, in my view, from SC27, looking into this, developing or adapting to this new situation. And I'll give you my take upon the background to that as well. But we have some support. We have the 27032 for the framework, we have 29100 for privacy, and we have some support in 27018 also for privacy. But then we have NIST, COBIT, and let's call it other players out there. If we look at cyber, and I should say also privacy security frameworks or standards, the view of SC27 has always been that the engine for everything is 27001. If you're in Africa and a lion attacks you, throw the 27001 standard at the lion and the lion will run away, because 27001 will solve each and any problem there is in the world. That is essentially the view of SC27 collectively. I do not, to 99, 100% share that view. I have a slightly different view, but that is the view of SC27. So over the last few years, there has been some national bodies and other stakeholders trying to put forward suggested new projects on, let's say, cybersecurity and privacy. And yes, to some extent it has been addressed, but maybe not still to the level where we can say that will the SC27, and that is the 27000 series of standards, give us all the help we need in order to address this as a detail level, on a detail level. If we look at the situation right now, I mentioned a few of these before, what we actually have also finally on the left-hand side there, you have ISO 27552, which is, as far as I know, still on a working draft level, which is a project looking at how to give support to 27001 when an organization wants to build what they call a privacy management system, or a PIMS. So that is now underway, so to speak, but it will take yet maybe another 3 years or so before it's there. So we have a situation where we have essentially from SC27 a very 27001 centric view on the world and also on how to develop standards. So what will most likely happen is that over time SC27 will start to develop further supporting standards based upon a 27001 approach, where you have the management system in the center, so to speak, and SC27 pitching or putting forward other standards, helping organizations who have implemented or are underway implementing an ISMS, addressing aspects of cybersecurity and or privacy by looking at supporting standards. You might claim that this is a good or a bad thing. I think that the problem we're having, and especially from a Nordic perspective, is that I'm not stating that it's a hard sell, but national standardization bodies have done a very poor work of explaining to the end users, to the general public, that besides ISO 27001, there are a number of other supporting standards. I would say that at least from a Nordic perspective, the Swedish Standardization Institute have severely failed in explaining to the market that there is more to the 27000 series than 27001. Most practitioners in the Nordic countries have no clue that we, for example, have standards within the family supporting, let's say, network security, application security, incident management, etc., etc. They have totally focused upon 27001, which is a good thing, but for the development of new standards and also for the, how shall I say, end users, I'm not too sure that it's the best thing to do. people now are very well aware of 27001. It is actually, you could say, the de facto standard for information security management, but the problem is that in many countries, again, standardization bodies have done a poor job of pushing and explaining what support there is to 27001 when it comes to different aspects of information security. And the problem we also face within SC27 is that if you look at the work program of SC27, it's huge. A few years ago, I don't have the exact number now, but over the years, SC27 has published over 150 standards in various areas, covering almost any aspect of information security in general. This means also that new projects, even projects including things which are, how shall I say, a theme to the general public and the end users, including topics such as cybersecurity and privacy, are not, how shall I say, from a marketing perspective, taken care of the way they should. And the other problem is that many people, and I'm not stating that they're wrong, regard ISO standardization and ISO standard as boring. And frankly, I mean, we had this discussion. I did a class the first few days this week on cybersecurity auditing. And I mean, we all agreed upon that one of the best ways making sure you fall asleep is trying to read a new standard. And the second problem is also that looking at standards, I mean, ISO 27001, it's a management system standard. The good and the bad thing is that ISO standards, management system standards, have been around for a long time, which means that people in organizations have various, how shall I say, experiences of both implementing and running a management system. We have heard some examples yesterday, for example, of organizations having good experiences of implementing a management system and several aspects of management systems, but many people, many organizations have a view that implementing a management system may be of little benefit to the organization. Yes, they get the paper on the wall, but what good will it actually do? What benefits is there with implementing an ISO standard? And that is also sometimes a problem you face when you want to implement ISO 27001, because and some organizations already having 9001 or 14001 on board might feel that, yeah, well, you know, we have these standards, but we mainly have them because customers like to see these certificates on our wall. As for 27001, our customers are not asking for it. So why should we buy? Because that's how they perceive it, these organizations. Why should we invest in having consultants come here, writing a manual of 200 pages, which we apply 2 weeks of the year to make sure that we pass the ISO audit? So you have that resistance with certain organizations, because many organizations, again, they're not aware of ISO standards. If they're aware of them, as some of you people may have experienced, the experience might not be 100% positive. So the problem we're facing, both as practitioners and also from an ISO perspective, I think, is that we need to really be able to stress the fact that, and I'm not going to explain this picture in detail, but we really need to be able to explain that essentially 27001 and supporting standards will help you achieve the accurate level of information security or cybersecurity or privacy, because generally speaking, the organization have ownership of what they're trying to produce, what they're trying to achieve. Many organizations still do not understand when you have a first meeting with them that they set the objectives for what they want to achieve. And generally speaking, and this is one of the good things which has been happening within ISO standardization over the last few years, is that with the introduction of the common structure, we have also introduced the concept of risk, you could say, to a greater level within all the ISO standards. But addressing this and making sure that the public and even some auditors within other certification bodies become aware of this will take some time. So generally speaking, whether we talk about ISO 27001 or privacy aspects, cybersecurity issues being encompassed within the management system, we need to be able to relate to that using ISO standards actually mean that we set levels appropriate for the specific organization within their specific context. Because many organizations still think that using ISO standards is essentially developing checklists. And if they are going to use ISO standards for privacy and cybersecurity as well, it means essentially developing another set of checklists. So for many organizations, and also for many implementers and auditors, they're still, how should I say, applying a mindset which means that applying a standard means that you essentially build checklists. Applying another standard means that you apply another set of checklists, etc., etc. When they should be more focusing on the actual content, the context, the actual goals and objective of the organization, and making sure that the levels that the organization is aiming for is based upon their context, what they need to achieve, obviously also including the legal and regulatory and contractual aspects, so to speak. The other problem we face also with ISO standards is that it's not a silver bullet solution. You always have, for example, the risk of human error. It doesn't matter how well you set up a management system or an information security management system. And especially when it comes to aspects such as cybersecurity and privacy, you need to make sure that areas such as incident management and business continuity are addressed appropriately, because this we all know. Bad things will happen. We don't know if it will happen today, tomorrow, next year, or in 4 years. Bad things will happen. So, my take on this is that in order for standardization to move forward, both ISO and local standardization bodies need to make sure that, firstly, they, how shall I say, are more keen on, how shall I say, addressing areas which are of general interest to the end users. There is a requirement for standardization projects to actually, present the business case, but to be honest, most of those business cases are typically built on what specific individuals would like to develop. They're put forward and they're approved. My view is that ISO and SC 27 should take more care looking at what the end user, what the market actually wants, and what the end users and what the market would like to see SC 27 prioritize. Because of course there is a limit to the resources within that group as well. And if you do not prioritize, that will affect severely the quality of the standards being produced over time as well. And also, we need to be, because we have a responsibility there as well, better at explaining on how ISO standards can actually support an organization, what they do not do, and how to actually build and use a management system. And we also need to make sure that our clients actually not only address, and I'm sure we will do this, but I will underline this as well anyway, do not only, how shall I say, address the documentary or documentation aspects of a management system with the flavors of privacy and cybersecurity becoming more and more important for real, because it's not only a matter of standardization and the view of various stakeholders, it's also a reality. Cyber threats and privacy issues become more and more important over time. We also need to make sure that clients do not only plan for this, they also need to train and test for this, because otherwise, even with the most beautiful documentation ever presented supporting their management system, there is very little value to it actually, because if it has not been planned, if it has not been tested, etc., it's still just documentation. And that more or less summarizes my view on this area. Any questions? No questions? I know Juris have a question, so I'll put the ball in your lap instead.
Yeah, so I mean, there's always been an issue of things happening faster than the market is happening, for example, in competition bodies.
Yes.
Do you see a point, or do you see a way, maybe, for things to speed up generally? How can you solve this?
Well, let me compare or make an example. I think that the main reason for SE27 so rapidly or comparably rapidly developing a subset to 27002 supporting cloud aspects was the fact that there was actually an international organization really lobbying for this to happen. If not, it would never have happened, or it would have taken another 5 years at least. So what we need to understand as practitioners is that the development of ISO standards in this field heavily depends upon who is trying to kick the ball in what direction, and what is the quality of that team trying to kick that ball in that specific direction. Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much.